one person asked me if I would go over a little bit about how to play bass for Screamo music. And this is just going to be like a really basic guide on things that I think are good in bass playing, because I'm not really totally aware of tons of techniques that exist that are Screamo specific when it comes to bass playing. But I have a few insights, and I think the most important thing to keep in mind if you're trying to be a bassist in a Screamo band in terms of composition is how are you going to connect or play off of what the guitarist is doing. If the guitarist is playing a really heavy riff and it's mostly power chords, maybe you want to hit those roots along with them and be super aggro and really fill out the space, the sonic space of that moment. But there's also situations where what the guitarist is doing might not necessarily be something that you need to be following super closely. And in those situations, you can play either a lower bass line that helps the audience keep track of what the chord progression might have been or currently is, or it can be something that just is complementary to whatever the guitarist is doing, but not the same thing, and typically lower it down. And I think it's good to kind of combine both of these things when you're trying to write a good song, right? Like, it's a way to differentiate apart, to have sections where there's big unison and everyone's just really jamming on their instruments, and then times when things sort of meander a little bit more and spread out. And, in those situations, maybe you can move up the neck a little bit. You don't necessarily want to cross voicings with the guitarist, but you could play some, stuff kind of in this range. Or, maybe you just want to hit a groove, but it's not the groove that the guitarist is playing down low. Like, I don't know, something kind of simple, but maybe the guitarist at that point is up here and they're playing all kinds of crazy panic chords and stuff, and you're just hitting that low down groove that makes people want to move around. Other things to keep in mind, like you are in charge of establishing what the root is. So, you want to take that into account when you're playing these parts, when you're writing these parts. How are you going to remind everybody of where the chord progression is, where it's going, if it's resolving or not? You don't necessarily always need to have a super elegant chord progression in your Screamo song, but it helps to have a little bit of harmonic motion. You have this idea of vertical and horizontal harmony that exists in music, and horizontal harmony is the harmony that takes you from one chord to the next, and it's usually most significantly characterized by the lowest notes that are being played at any given time. So as the bass player, your job is to play those notes. You are in charge of telling people what the chords are, if there are chords, and there should be some chords sometimes. So that's just a really important thing to keep in mind. You probably want to get pretty good at either playing fingerstyle really fast and really jamming hard on the string, so you get that nice fat attack, that kind of like nu metal-y sound. Or you can play with a pick. I'm not a big pick person myself, but it does produce a nice attack that I think works really well in punk music. And I think if you're a guitarist who's moving over to the bass, it's like a really good way to acclimate yourself to the instrument, because it's just basically a big guitar. And there's one other technique I wanted to talk about, which is that you can always be playing chords on the bass too, and I think this comes in handy in particular when you are playing Screamo, because the guitars in Screamo, like let's say you're in a 3-piece Screamo band, are oftentimes doing stuff really high up on the neck. And if you don't have a rhythm guitarist, well, one way you can get around that is by just playing the power chords, right? Like on the bass, while the guitarist is playing something else. You don't want too much, I guess, like reggae tone. Low end is good, but you're going to lose any crunch you might try to add to your sound if you have too much low end. That's like pretty much it. Like, bass is pretty simple, I want to say, in Screamo. It doesn't always have to be simple. Like, you can write some pretty complex parts, but I think, your job as the bass player is to basically think of yourself as the left hand of the piano, right? And the left hand of the piano is usually playing something a little bit slower that is kind of helping to mark time and helping to keep the harmony in check. And in terms of filling out, the vertical harmony in complement to the horizontal harmony that the bass player is mostly in charge of. You have the guitar player, and they can be playing high on the neck. They can be playing big leads, whatever. These are both really important aspects of a proper arrangement, right? Like you really want to have both of these roles fulfilled. So I wouldn't think of it so much as like, oh, your job is easier, because it actually isn't. It's in a way is much more critical. Like it's the actual basis for the rest of the harmonic structure of the song, and you really have to be playing in time because you're helping to mark time. It's a really fun instrument, and I really recommend giving it a shot, especially if you're just trying to get into understanding music, because there's all kinds of kind of like cool, simple things like you can learn, and I think it's much easier to learn your classic bass part than it is to learn a lot of classic guitar parts right off the bat.